The school bus was sliding sideways down the icy hill at 45 miles per hour. 23 kids screaming, no way to stop. That's when their 68-year-old bus driver did something that defied physics and revealed a past none of them could have imagined. Welcome to Dream Blaze. Before we begin this story of silence, courage, and forgotten heroes, tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from today? And if you believe stories like this deserve to be remembered, hit that subscribe button and help us honor those who never asked for recognition. His name was Frank Morrison. For 12 years, he'd driven Route 47 through Millfield County. Same yellow bus, same faded blue jacket, same thermos of black coffee that never quite stayed warm. The kids called him Mr. Frank when they remembered to call him anything at all. Most days they didn't notice him. He was just part of the background, like the stop signs in the morning fog. Frank never minded. He preferred the quiet. At 6:30 every morning, he'd walk around bus number 847, checking the tires, testing the brakes, running his weathered hands along the yellow paint like he was inspecting something far more important than a school bus. The other drivers thought he was obsessive. They'd joke about paranoid Frank and his endless safety checks. But Frank had learned long ago that details save lives. He was always 15 minutes early to every stop, always positioned the bus at the exact same angle, always watched the mirrors until every child was seated before shifting into drive. The kids saw it as routine. Frank saw it as protocol, a word that meant something different to him than it did to most people. The morning of January 15th started like any other. 23 kids boarded at their usual stops. Sarah Chen, the quiet 8th grader who always sat behind the driver, the Martinez twins who never stopped talking, Jake Williams, the high school senior who thought he was too cool for the bus but had no other way to school, and little Emma Rodriguez, 7 years old, gap-toothed smile, always the last one on at Maple Street. Frank checked his mirrors, adjusted his seat, and pulled away from the final stop at exactly 7:42 a.m. The radio crackled with weather warnings, but the road seemed fine. A thin layer of frost, nothing the old bus couldn't handle. He'd driven through worse. The trouble started on Miller's Hill, the steep descent that led into town. Frank felt it first in the steering wheel, a slight pull to the right that shouldn't have been there. Then he pressed the brake pedal and felt something that made his blood run cold. Nothing. The pedal went straight to the floor. No resistance, no slowing, just the bus gathering speed down the 12% grade with 23 children behind him. In the back, someone laughed at a joke. They had no idea. Frank's mind went ice-cold calm. Not panic, not fear. Just the same clarity that had kept him alive through 3 tours in Vietnam 40 years earlier. Time slowed. Options narrowed. Physics became the enemy. 45 miles per hour and climbing. The curve at the bottom of the hill, approaching fast. Beyond that, Main Street, morning traffic, and the elementary school where parents were dropping off younger children. He could have yanked the wheel hard right, rolled the bus, absorbed the impact himself, and maybe saved some of them. He could have aimed for the guardrail, hoped the metal would slow them enough. Most drivers would have chosen panic. Frank chose something else. He reached down and pulled the emergency brake. Not the cord the kids could see, but a secondary system most people didn't know existed. It slowed them slightly, but not enough. Then he did something that shouldn't have worked. He downshifted. Not just once, but in a sequence that turned the transmission into a secondary braking system. Engine braking, gear compression, using the motor itself to fight gravity. It was a technique he had learned on military transport vehicles in Southeast Asia, driving supply trucks down mountain passes under enemy fire when stopping wasn't an option, and speeding up meant death. But that wasn't enough either. The curve was coming up fast, and beyond it, the intersection where Mrs. Patterson walked her kindergarten class to school every morning at 8 a.m. sharp. That's when Frank did something that changed everything. He turned the steering wheel hard left, not into the curve, but away from it, straight into Thompson's cornfield. The bus broke through the thin wooden fence like it was paper, but the posts slowed them. Then the wheels hit the soft, frozen earth, and Frank felt the grip he'd been praying for. He worked the wheel like a pilot fighting a damaged aircraft, using the terrain, the furrows in the field, even the angle of the slope to bleed speed. The bus bounced, kids screamed, but they were slowing. Frank kept his foot off the useless brake pedal and steered with 40 years of muscle memory. When they finally stopped, nose down in the middle of Thompson's field, the silence was absolute. Then Emma Rodriguez started crying, and the spell broke. "Everyone okay back there?" Frank called, his voice steady as stone. One by one they answered, shaken, scared, but alive. All 23 of them. Frank sat in the driver's seat, hands still gripping the wheel, and for the first time in 40 years, he allowed himself to shake. Within 10 minutes, the field was full of vehicles, police cars, fire trucks, ambulances, and parents who'd heard about the accident on the radio. Frank stood beside the bus, answering questions with the same quiet efficiency he'd always shown. "How did you know to turn into the field?" asked Officer Martinez, Sarah's uncle. Frank shrugged. "Seemed like the right thing to do." "But that maneuver, the way you controlled the skid, where did you learn that?" Frank didn't answer right away. He was watching the kids being checked by paramedics, making sure each one was really okay. Finally, he said, "You pick things up." But Jake Williams had heard something. While the adults talked, he had walked around to the front of the bus and seen something that made him freeze. There, on Frank's jacket, partially hidden by the reflective vest, was a small patch, faded, nearly worn away, but unmistakable to anyone who knew military insignia. 1st Cavalry Division, Air Mobile. Jake's grandfather had served in Vietnam. He knew what that patch meant. That afternoon, Jake went home and asked his grandfather about the 1st Cavalry. The old man's face went serious. "Air Mobile. Son, those were the helicopter boys. They went in first, went in fast, and went in when nobody else could get there." "Why are you asking?" Jake told him about Frank, about the patch, about how a 68-year-old bus driver had saved 23 kids with moves that seemed impossible. His grandfather was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "What was his name again?" "Frank Morrison." The old man walked to his computer, spent an hour searching through databases Jake didn't know existed. Finally, he turned around, his face pale. "Jake, your bus driver. He's not just some old guy who learned to drive in the Army. Frank Morrison, Staff Sergeant Frank Morrison, Distinguished Service Cross Bronze Star with V device, Purple Heart with 2 clusters. Jake didn't understand all the words, but he understood the tone. He was a helicopter crew chief in the Central Highlands, flew over 200 combat missions. The citation says he saved 37 men under fire, including pulling a pilot from a burning aircraft while taking enemy rounds. Jake's grandfather turned back to the computer screen, scrolling through decades-old records. Says here he was wounded 3 times, kept flying until the doctors wouldn't clear him anymore. Last notation shows he requested transfer to vehicle transport, drove supply trucks for the rest of his tour. Jake swallowed hard. "Grandpa, what does that mean? Why would a hero end up driving a school bus?" The old man smiled sadly. "Son, real heroes don't stop being heroes. They just find new people to protect." The next morning, when Frank climbed aboard the replacement bus to finish Route 47, something was different. The kids were quieter, more respectful. Sarah Chen looked at him differently. Jake Williams sat closer to the front, but it was Emma Rodriguez who said what they were all thinking. "Mr. Frank," she said in her small voice, "thank you for saving us." Frank adjusted his rearview mirror and smiled, really smiled, for the first time in years. "Just doing my job, Emma. Just doing my job." But as he pulled away from Maple Street, 23 kids behind him safe in their seats, Frank Morrison allowed himself a moment of something he'd almost forgotten. Pride. Not in the medals tucked away in his closet, not in the citations he never talked about, but in the simple fact that when 23 children needed a hero, he was exactly where he was supposed to be, behind the wheel, watching the mirrors, keeping them safe. Some men save the world once and spend the rest of their lives remembering it. Others save a busload of kids on a Tuesday morning and never mention it again. Frank Morrison had been both kinds of hero. And on Route 47, that was exactly what 23 children needed. The story didn't end there. Word spread through Millfield County the way important news always does. Not through headlines, but through whispers over coffee, phone calls between neighbors, kids talking to their parents at dinner. Within a week, everyone knew that their quiet bus driver was something more. But Frank hadn't changed. Same thermos, same 15-minute early arrivals, same careful inspection of bus number 847's replacement. The difference was in how people looked at him now. The principal, who'd barely noticed him for 12 years, now walked out to meet the bus every morning. Parents who'd never said hello began waving from their windows. The kids, all 23 of them, started saying, "Good morning, Mr. Frank," without being asked. But perhaps the most important change was in Emma Rodriguez. 3 months after the accident, she approached Frank as he finished his daily safety inspection. In her small hand was a folded piece of paper. "I drew you something," she said quietly. Frank opened it carefully. It was a crayon drawing of a yellow school bus surrounded by children, all of them smiling. At the top, in careful 7-year-old handwriting, were 4 words. "My hero, Mr. Frank." Frank stared at the drawing for a long moment. Then he folded it carefully and tucked it into his jacket pocket, right next to the faded patch that Jake Williams had spotted months earlier. "Thank you, Emma," he said. "I'll keep this safe." And he did. Every day for the rest of his time driving Route 47, that drawing rode with him. A reminder that heroes aren't always the ones with the loudest voices or the biggest stages. Sometimes they're the ones who show up early, check the mirrors twice, and never mention the medals in their closet. Because the real measure of a hero isn't what they've done in the past. It's what they're willing to do when the people they protect need them most. So I ask you now, have you ever met someone like Frank Morrison, someone whose quiet strength only showed itself when it mattered most? Tell us their story in the comments. Share their name. Let the world know about the heroes who hide in plain sight. Because here at Dream Blaze, we believe that true courage doesn't announce itself. It just shows up when you need it most. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, subscribe and share it with someone who believes in quiet heroes. We'll see you in the next story. And the next time you see a school bus driver, a janitor, or anyone whose job seems ordinary, look closer. You might be looking at someone extraordinary.